Some rivalries are about talent, others are about ego. This one would have been about something else. Who refuses to back down? Ayrton Senna and Max Verstappen never raced each other. But if they had, this wouldn't have been a normal rivalry. Not because of the cars, not because of the era, but because of a way of racing only a few truly privileged drivers possess. My name is Will, and this is Carta Motorsport. Let's go! Ayrton Senna and Max Verstappen come from completely different eras. Different cars, different rules, different risks. But at their core, they share something very rare. They don't race to manage situations. They race to control them. And under pressure, that difference matters. This video isn't about who was faster. It's about how they react when there is no margin left. Because that's where drivers like this separate themselves from everyone else. There's another parallel that explains why this rivalry would have been inevitable. And it's not just about the track. In both Ayrton Senna's and Max Verstappen's eras, power already had a holder. In Senna's time, that power was embodied by Alain Prost. He was the establishment's favorite driver, the most stable, the one who best understood the political game of Formula One, the man in charge. Decades later, history repeated itself with Lewis Hamilton, multiple champion, backed by the dominant team, the undisputed benchmark of the grid, the driver around whom everything revolved. And in both cases, the same thing happened. Someone arrived who didn't fit into the established order. Senna didn't come from a nationality typically found in Formula One. Brazil wasn't the center of the paddock. But what he did have was something few drivers have ever had: an entire country cheering him on. Brazil didn't just support Senna. Brazil lived through Senna. Every Sunday, every overtake, every pole position was a national issue. Something very similar happened with Verstappen. The Netherlands wasn't historically a Formula One powerhouse either. But when Max appeared, the sport changed color. Orange grandstands, a sea of orange on the circuits, an entire country following his every move. And that matters more than it seems. Because when a driver isn't just competing for himself, but feels he represents something bigger, his racing style changes. Therein lies another profound similarity between Senna and Verstappen. Both burst onto a Formula One scene with established hierarchies and challenged them without asking permission. Prost and Hamilton were the men to beat. The ones who controlled the pace. The ones who knew when to take risks and when not to. Senna and Verstappen didn't arrive to negotiate that balance. They arrived to shatter it. And when that kind of driver faces the establishment favorite, the rivalry ceases to be sporting. It becomes symbolic. It's not just about who wins the race. It's about what kind of driver reigns in Formula One. That's why the rivalry between Senna and Verstappen wouldn't have been just intense on the track. It would have been a fight for control of the narrative, for deciding whether Formula One belongs to those who manage or to those who impose. All these parallels inevitably lead to one point, a specific moment, a decision that defines an era. The 1989 Japanese Grand Prix wasn't just a race. It was the moment Formula One was forced to confront itself. A championship at stake, 2 drivers, 1 corner, and no intention of yielding. Ayrton Senna knew exactly what was at stake. Not just a title, but control of Formula One. The message of who was in charge when there was no room for error. At that point, Senna didn't consider alternatives. He didn't calculate future consequences. He decided. Because for him, Yielding at that moment meant accepting an order he didn't recognize. So he didn't accept it. And then there was the investigation. At the center of it stood the president of the FIA at the time, Jean-Marie Balestre, a man whose neutrality had already been questioned long before that day in Suzuka, a man who had never hidden his admiration for Alain Prost. For years, it had been whispered and often openly said that Balestre favored Prost, that he saw in him the ideal representative of Formula One, calculated, political, controlled. So when the decision came, it didn't just feel controversial, it felt predictable. The investigation moved quickly, too quickly. Senna was disqualified, the championship was awarded to Prost, and Formula One moved on, officially. But the damage was already done. Because Japan 1989 wasn't just about a ruling, it was about trust. Trust in the idea that when everything is on the line, the sport remains above its own politics. For many, that trust was broken that day. Balestre would later admit years after that the decision was wrong. But by then, it no longer mattered. The rivalry had crossed the point of no return, and Formula One had been pulled directly into the conflict. This is why Japan 1989 still resonates. Not because of the collision, not because of the outcome, but because it marked the moment when a rivalry became bigger than the drivers themselves. And once that happens, the sport is no longer just observing. Decades later, Formula One found itself in a disturbingly familiar situation. A championship decided at the final minute. Two drivers representing opposing racing styles. And once again, the sport's governing body at the center of the storm. The 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix didn't just have a dramatic ending. It was a test of endurance, not just for the drivers, but for Formula One itself. On one side, Lewis Hamilton, the reigning champion. The benchmark. The driver who knew how to manage a championship when everything was on the line. On the other side, Max Verstappen, representing a different philosophy. Uncompromising, refusing to wait, refusing to relinquish control. When the safety car came out, the championship entered uncharted territory. And that's when Formula One crossed the same line it had crossed in 1989. Race director Michael Masi suddenly found himself in an untenable situation. Forced to make a decision under global pressure, broadcast live, and with consequences that would define the championship. The radios told the story better than any regulation ever could. This is not right. Michael, no. The voices of the pit wall weren't just protesting a call. They were reacting to the feeling that control was slipping away. Images from that night became instant symbols. Toto Wolff, headphones slammed onto the desk, a gesture of disbelief, of helplessness, not anger, frustration, because just like in Japan 1989, the controversy wasn't only about the outcome, it was about process, about whether the system could remain neutral when everything was at stake. Verstappen, like Senna decades earlier, did what his mentality demanded. He didn't wait for permission. He took the moment when it appeared. Hamilton, like Prost before him, found himself on the other side of a defining decision. The side where control is lost, not through a mistake, but through a ruling. Different drivers, different era. Same uncomfortable question. When rivalries reach this level, Formula One is no longer just the stage. It becomes part of the story. Japan 1989 showed what happens when a rivalry forces the sport to choose. Abu Dhabi 2021 proved that the lesson was never fully learned. And that is why a rivalry between Ayrton Senna and Max Verstappen wouldn't have been hypothetical chaos. It would have been inevitable. Because history shows us one thing very clearly. When two drivers refuse to yield, Formula One itself is eventually forced to decide how far it's willing to go. We're nearing the end of this look back at some of Formula One's greatest rivalries. And the question remains, what would have happened if Max Verstappen had faced Ayrton Senna? How many similarities would that rivalry have had with Senna-Prost or Hamilton-Verstappen? What if Prost had competed against Hamilton? What if all four had shared the track? Scenarios we'll never see, but which explain why this sport continues to captivate us. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which rivalry you would have liked to see. See you in the next video.